When mistakes make miracles. Grandpa Robert, can we talk? I'm curious about something, young Ben chirped as he stepped onto the porch, where his grandfather sat in his favorite rocking chair, a steaming cup of tea in hand. Of course, Ben, replied Grandpa Robert, his weathered face lighting up with a warm smile. What's on your mind, lad? Ben settled into the chair opposite his grandfather. At school, my teacher told us that some great inventions were discovered by accident. Is that true? Like, can a mistake really lead to something useful? Grandpa Robert chuckled, his voice deep and comforting like a familiar song. Oh, absolutely, my boy. Sometimes, life's best ideas come from what you think is a blunder. Let me tell you about a little incident right here in our village that turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Years ago, Grandpa began, when I was about your age, our village was known for its wheat fields. We had some of the best harvests in the entire region. Everyone worked hard, and the wheat brought in enough to keep our families fed and happy. But one year, everything went wrong. The weather turned unpredictable. There were storms, and the rains came too late. By harvest time, many of the crops were ruined. It was a tough year. The village elders called a meeting to discuss how we could recover. What happened then? Ben asked, leaning forward eagerly. Well, Grandpa Robert said, there was a young farmer named Jacob in the village. Jacob was a bit of a dreamer, always experimenting with new ideas for farming. Some villagers thought he was wasting time, but others admired his curiosity. That year, Jacob tried growing a different type of grain called millet alongside his wheat. What's millet? Ben interrupted, his brow furrowed. Millet is a smaller grain, tougher than wheat, and it doesn't need much water to grow, Grandpa explained. Jacob had planted it as an experiment, thinking it might survive if the wheat failed. But he made a big mistake when planting the millet. Ben's eyes widened. What kind of mistake? He planted it too close to the wheat. Grandpa said with a hearty laugh. You see, wheat and millet need different kinds of care. Wheat grows tall and needs lots of water, while millet stays shorter and prefers drier conditions. The two crops ended up competing for space, sunlight, and nutrients. By harvest time, both crops looked half dead, and Jacob was convinced he'd ruined everything. Jacob was devastated, Grandpa continued. He thought his experiment was a failure and that he had wasted precious land. But something unusual happened. As the villagers started harvesting their fields, they realized Jacob's crop wasn't as bad as they'd thought. His millet, though stunted, had survived the storms much better than the wheat. And even the wheat, though it didn't grow as tall as usual, produced grains that were surprisingly plump. Everyone was puzzled. How could two struggling crops still give a decent yield? Ben tilted his head. Why did that happen, Grandpa? Well, Jacob didn't understand it at first either, Grandpa admitted. But he was determined to find out. He started talking to the older farmers, asking questions and observing the fields closely. Eventually, he realized that the millet and wheat, despite competing, had actually helped each other in an unexpected way. The millet's shorter stalks provided shade for the wheat, protecting it from the scorching sun during the hottest days. And the wheat's deeper roots helped bring up moisture from the soil, which the millet could use too. Together, they managed to survive conditions that would have wiped out either crop on its own. Wait, Ben said, his face lighting up, so his mistake wasn't really a mistake? It actually worked. Exactly, Grandpa said, his eyes twinkling. Jacob's so-called failure turned into a brilliant discovery. He called it companion planting. He started experimenting with other crop combinations, like beans and corn, and found that pairing certain plants could make them stronger together than they were apart. The news spread quickly. Farmers from other villages came to learn about Jacob's methods. Soon, our village became famous not just for its wheat, but for its innovative farming techniques. And it all started because of a mistake. Ben sat back, pondering the story. So, Grandpa, does that mean mistakes aren't always bad? Grandpa Robert smiled and leaned forward, resting his hands on his cane. That's right, Ben. Mistakes are just opportunities in disguise. What matters is how you respond to them. You can choose to give up and feel sorry for yourself, or you can learn from what went wrong and turn it into something good. He paused, letting the words sink in. Remember, life is full of unexpected twists. Sometimes, when things don't go the way you planned, it's because a better path is waiting for you, one you might never have found otherwise. Ben nodded slowly. I think I get it now. So, if I mess up on something, I should look for what I can learn from it. That's the spirit, Grandpa said with a chuckle. Every mistake holds a lesson, and sometimes those lessons lead to the best ideas. Ben glanced at the fields beyond the porch, where golden wheat swayed gently in the breeze. Grandpa, is Jacob still here in the village? Grandpa Robert's face grew wistful. Jacob passed away many years ago, but his legacy lives on. The farmers here still use companion planting techniques, and our village remains one of the most innovative in the region. And you know what? What? Grandpa leaned closer, his voice soft but full of pride. Whenever I see the fields, I think of Jacob and how his mistake became a blessing, not just for him, but for all of us. Ben smiled, feeling inspired. Thanks for the story, Grandpa. I think I'll remember it the next time I make a mistake. Grandpa Robert laughed, his deep, hearty laugh echoing through the air. Good lad. Just remember, sometimes the best things in life are born from the unexpected. The two sat quietly for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the fields in hues of orange and gold. In that peaceful moment, Ben knew he'd learned something that would stay with him forever, that even the smallest mistakes could lead to the greatest discoveries.